Ava Bennett only meant to deliver white roses to dressing room 7, but the loose brass number sent her into room 17 instead. Inside sat Julian Whitmore, the famous conductor no one dared disturb, his silver cane beside a trembling hand. Ava gasped, dropped the flowers, and bent to grab a fallen music page. Without thinking, she hummed one line from her grandmother's old song. Julian's cane hit the floor. "Who taught you that melody?" he whispered. Ava froze. By midnight, that wrong door would expose the aria Harrington Opera stole 30 years ago. One wrong door can change who gets remembered forever. On premiere night at Harrington Opera House, Ava Bennett moved through the lobby in her black Usher uniform, guiding diamond-covered patrons beneath gold chandeliers while violins tuned behind the velvet curtain. She was supposed to deliver white roses to dressing room 7, but the brass number on the hallway wall hung loose after setup. Ava followed the wrong arrow, knocked once, and opened dressing room 17. Inside sat Julian Whitmore, the legendary conductor returning after years away, his silver cane leaning beside a chair and his hands trembling over a marked score. Ava froze. "I am so sorry," she whispered, bending to gather a fallen page. Then, without thinking, she hummed the melody printed there. The note left Ava's lips for barely 3 seconds, but Julian Whitmore reacted like the walls had spoken. His silver cane slipped from his fingers and struck the floor with a sharp crack that cut through the dressing room. Ava stopped humming. The famous conductor stared at her, all color gone from his face. "Who taught you that melody?" he asked. Ava clutched the roses against her uniform. "My grandmother," she said. "Grace Bennett." Julian's breath caught. Outside the door, stagehands called 5 minutes to curtain, but he did not move. "That song was not supposed to survive," he whispered. Then footsteps rushed down the hall, and Ava realized someone else had heard the name. Ava wanted to explain that Grace Bennett was not a secret to her family, just a voice from a warm kitchen, a woman who sang while folding laundry and wrote music in a blue notebook Ava still carried in her coat pocket. At Harrington, no one knew that. To them, Ava was the black usher with a flashlight, the one who guided wealthy patrons to velvet seats and stayed quiet when they spoke over her. After every show, when the chandeliers dimmed and the stage went dark, she stayed behind to straighten programs and hum into the empty hall. That melody had kept her company for years. Now Julian looked at her like she had opened a grave. The door swung wider, and Margaret Lowell appeared. Margaret Lowell stepped into the dressing room with the cold smile of someone who could end a paycheck before intermission. "Miss Bennett," she said, looking at the roses in Ava's hands, "ushers do not enter private artist rooms." Ava lowered her eyes. The number on the door was loose. "I thought this was room 7. Margaret glanced at Julian's fallen cane, then at the sheet music near Ava's feet. Her expression sharpened. "You will leave now, and after tonight we will discuss whether you still work here." Ava felt the floor vanish beneath her. Rent, her brother's tuition, the blue notebook in her pocket. Then Julian bent slowly, picked up his cane, and said, "No, she stays." Margaret's face tightened, but the hallway call rang again. 2 minutes to curtain. Julian looked at Ava, not as an usher, but as if she were holding the missing piece of an old confession. After the performance, he said quietly, "Come to the empty stage. Bring whatever your grandmother left you." Ava's hand moved to the blue notebook hidden inside her coat. Margaret noticed. Her eyes narrowed, but applause thundered from the auditorium as the orchestra began to tune. Julian took his cane and walked toward the stage door, each step slow but certain. Before he crossed the threshold, he turned back. "Do not let anyone take that notebook from you." Ava stood frozen, roses in her arms, realizing her mistake had just become a warning. The performance ended beneath a standing ovation Ava barely heard. She spent the final act near the back aisle, one hand over the blue notebook beneath her coat, feeling Margaret's eyes on her from across the lobby. When the last patron left and the chandelier lights dimmed, Ava walked onto the empty stage. Julian waited beside a black piano, his silver cane resting against the bench. Without the audience, the opera house felt enormous, like it was holding its breath. Ava placed the notebook on the music stand. The cover was faded, the corners soft from years of use. Julian touched it carefully. "Sing the first page," he said. Ava swallowed, opened her grandmother's song, and let the first note rise into the dark. Ava's voice started small, almost afraid of the empty velvet seats, then grew until the notes climbed into the painted ceiling and came back fuller than before. Julian closed his eyes. His hand tightened around the edge of the piano, not from pain, but recognition. When Ava finished the final phrase, silence filled the hall so completely she could hear her own heartbeat. Julian opened the notebook to the margin where Grace Bennett had written a date in blue ink. "This is not a family song," he said. "This is the original aria from Harrington's Lost 1994 season." Ava stepped back. Lost? Julian looked toward the dark balcony, where footsteps shifted in the shadows. "No," he whispered. "Stolen." Julian turned toward the balcony. "Who is there?" The shadow moved, then disappeared behind the side curtain. Ava clutched the blue notebook as he led her through the backstage corridor and down a narrow stairwell beneath the opera house. The air smelled of dust, velvet, and old wood. In the prop room, forgotten crowns and painted columns leaned against the walls like ghosts from other seasons. Julian stopped at a cedar trunk marked Season 1994. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside lay a yellowed score with Grace Bennett's handwriting across the top, The Sparrow's Prayer. Ava covered her mouth. In the corner, a donor approval stamp bore one name, Preston Vale. The name sat on the page like a locked door finally opened. Preston Vale, Harrington's largest donor, the man whose portrait hung above the grand staircase, had approved the score the same year Grace disappeared from every program. Ava's hands trembled around the blue notebook. "He knew," she whispered. Julian closed the trunk and looked older beneath the basement light. "He did more than know." A slow clap echoed from the stairwell. Preston Vale stepped into view in a black evening coat, smiling as if he had arrived for dessert. Margaret stood behind him. "Maestro," Preston said softly, "you are digging through history that no longer belongs to you." Ava lifted her chin. "It belonged to my grandmother first." Preston's smile never reached his eyes. "Miss Bennett, you have talent. Talent needs friends." Margaret opened a leather folder and placed a document on the prop table. "Sign this, and Harrington will keep you employed. We may even arrange an audition when the season allows." Ava looked at the number printed at the bottom, more money than she had ever seen at once. Rent, her brother's books, a doctor bill still folded in her purse. For one breath, the offer felt like rescue. Then she looked at Grace's handwriting, small and steady after 30 years of silence. Ava picked up the agreement, tore it neatly in half, and let the pieces fall beside the stolen score. "My grandmother already paid enough." Preston's face hardened, but Julian stepped forward, cane steady against the floor. "The encore begins in 10 minutes, he said. "And tonight, the house will hear the name it erased." Margaret whispered that he could not change the program. Julian looked past her to the stairwell, where chorus members, stagehands, and one reporter had gathered after hearing raised voices. "Watch me conduct the truth," he said. Upstairs, the gala audience returned from intermission expecting a polished finale for donors. Instead, Julian walked alone to the podium, slower than before, but taller somehow. He raised one hand, and the orchestra went silent. "Before the final piece," he said, "Harrington Opera owes a debt to Grace Bennett." Then he turned toward the wings. "Ava, come forward." Ava stepped into the light, still wearing her Usher uniform, the blue notebook held against her chest. A ripple moved through the audience. Some recognized her as the woman who showed them to their seats. Others only saw someone who was not supposed to stand there. Julian placed Grace's yellowed score on the conductor's stand. "This aria was written by Grace Bennett," he said, "and hidden from this stage for 30 years. Preston rose from his donor box, but the reporter's camera was already pointed at him. Ava opened the notebook. Her first note trembled, then steadied, filling the hall with a prayer that sounded like grief learning to fly. In the chorus section, an elderly singer covered her mouth. "I heard Grace sing this," she whispered. By morning, every paper in the city carried Grace Bennett's name where silence had lived for 30 years. Preston Vale resigned from the board before noon, and Margaret Lowell was removed after the archives confirmed the hidden score, the donor stamp, and the erased contracts. Months later, Ava returned to Harrington not with a flashlight, but in a pale blue gown the color of her grandmother's notebook. The program read, "The Sparrow's Prayer," composed by Grace Bennett, performed by Ava Bennett. Julian sat in the front row, his silver cane across his knees, his eyes bright with quiet pride. When Ava sang the first line, the opera house did not feel stolen anymore. It felt returned.